F1 podcast. It's just Nigel and myself today, as Freddie is off. Well, we don't actually know what he's doing, but he's enjoying his Sunday in a way that we are not, because we are sat here about to do a Winging It F1 podcast. And we came on this morning and Nigel arranged this recording and then came on with absolutely no ideas of what to do. So we are doing some standard, not off-season, but intra-race content for you. It's the winners and losers of the opening 3 rounds of the Formula One World Championship 2023. But before we get stuck into that, Nigel, how are you?
Been an emotional couple of weeks for reasons I can't actually talk about at the moment. But yeah, recently I've been all right. Snooker World Championship started and Ronnie O'Sullivan got through to the second round, which is very, very good news for me and Eurosport. So very happy about that. So yeah, I'm good. To answer your question, how are you, Adam? I've got to ask that question in response now, don't I? Just because that's polite and that's what manners are, I think.
Yes, that is indeed correct. I am probably less affected by any snooker related news. To be honest, I kind of stick to sports mostly, but apart from that, it's been a good. Well, it's
not. Snooker's not a sport.
I know snooker isn't a sport.
For anyone who thinks snooker is a sport, please message Adam.
It's not. There's, we've had this discussion many. This could have been the podcast, to be honest. We've had this discussion many times.
Should we get rid of the F1? Let's debate
this. but that would need a new logo, so I'm not able to do that just for a one-off episode. But apart from that, it has. I don't know. It feels like a lot has happened since the last race. Been two whole monuments since the last F1 race. And for any cycling fans out there. But yeah, aside from that, there's a few bits and pieces that we will talk about when we do our Australian Grand Prix preview, unless something else unless some bigger news has broken. But without wanting to leave Freddie out of those conversations, then yeah, we are doing the winners and losers of the opening 3 rounds. I write this column for totalmotorsport.com every race about the winners and losers of each Grand Prix. So go and check those out if you are interested in having some more detail.
You didn't do it for testing though, did you? But that's not a race, so.
Well, yeah, exactly. So that's why I didn't specify that I didn't do it for testing, because I already did that with the race. But yeah, who did do it for testing? I've forgotten.
Someone called Ed Spencer did it for testing.
Oh yeah, that's it, Ed Spencer. So go and check out his as well if you're interested on that. Although it's a while back now in the past, as is. This is what happens when Freddie's not here to anchor us, then we just go off on a bit. But I will drag it back, and Nigel, I'll leave it open. Actually, no, I won't. Give us a winner of the opening 3 rounds of the season.
The winner, well, Verstappen were the winners. But to do a podcast, I'm going to say Max Verstappen is a winner because he's leading the championship, and yes, he probably could have won all 3 races had he not had the drive shaft problems in Saudi Arabia qualifying. But I think he's massive favourite to win the title now. Red Bull have produced an outstanding car. Obviously, Hamilton and Russell have been saying it's the most dominant car they've ever seen and that kind of thing, which I don't fully agree with. But they've clearly got a very handy margin over the rest of the field, and I think all the mechanics, all the engineers who've worked on this car, especially with the budget cap penalty as well, it's just been an amazing job, really, to produce something like this and then put Verstappen in it. It clearly suits his driving style. He's not really had too many problems, I don't think, in terms of the actual driving of it. So I think Verstappen overall, Verstappen and Red Bull are the 2 biggest winners, really. And it's very hard to see how it's hard to see how they're going to lose too many races at the moment. Obviously, the development race could change and stuff. But yeah, so far, Verstappen and Red Bull.
Yeah, it could all change in Baku as teams bring their upgrades. Although I don't know if they would bring them to Baku, really. And then there's Miami after that, which again, they might, probably more likely to. But yeah, I mean, the only thing, there's been so many conversations about Verstappen's retirement. I don't know whether it's just people are bored or what, but like he made the comments about after Dominicali talks about wanting to remove free practice altogether and have more sprint weekends. And Verstappen said, "Oh well, if you keep messing around with the format, then I'm probably not going to be around for too much longer." Do you think that's kind of real, or do you think it is just kind of people in a 4 week gap between races, people picking up on anything?
I think it is real because I think these comments were said like during the Australian Grand Prix weekend on the Friday and Saturday when Verstappen was speaking to the media. But I do feel like he is kind of more like a Fernando Alonso character and could take a year out of F1 in, I don't know, 10, 12 years or something, and then realise how much he misses it and then come back. But Verstappen, he just absolutely loves racing. He loves it more than, say, Hamilton for me, because Hamilton has got all his off track activities. And Verstappen is more of the kind of pure out and out race. I mean, when he's not racing on an F1 weekend, he's doing sim races and he's winning them with his teammates and that kind of thing. So I think Verstappen just loves racing, and F1 is the ultimate motorsport. So I don't really see him walking away from it, say before the age of 30, but I could definitely see him taking a year out, but then realise he misses it, and then he'll come back. So I think the talk of it was just not heated at the moment, but that's just him being honest, which I think he generally is to the press in terms of that question that he was asked.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think it has largely been blown up as a talking point, just because of the gap. But yeah, I agree. I just can't see what else he'd do. Like he does seem very kind of wedded to F1 specifically. Like I I just kind of can't see him maybe dabbling in those other motorsports as much. I mean, even Alonso, part of his primary motivation for going off to do the other sports was that he wanted to be considered, the greatest driver of all time, and he couldn't win 7 world F1 World Championships or 8 F1 World Championships to match that accolade at the top of the sport. So he wanted to do the Triple Crown to have that as a kind of unique. I mean, Graham Hill did it in the 60s, but have that as unique in modern motorsports as him being the only person to do that. Whereas Verstappen could, very well win 7 or 8 championships or even more and be, reset that benchmark again. So yeah, I'd be surprised if he does go away, because it feels like he feels like a much, F1 specific, feels like a much bigger motivator for him. But yeah, I think I don't know. It's such a long contract as well. Like it's 2028. It's 5 years away. Like it is a long time. You look like you wanted to jump in, say something.
I do want to jump in and say something. Also, his dad, Jos Verstappen, I think there's no way he's going to let Max Verstappen retire before he's not broken all or most of like the big records. So most wins, most titles. I do not see him walking away before that. So we are talking 2028, 2029, 2030, which is such a long time away. And so much is going to happen between then, in his personal life and on the track and that kind of thing. So, yeah, Verstappen's not going to go anywhere for the next 6 or 7 years. I can pretty much, not guarantee, obviously, but I'm quite sure of.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that sums up the Red Bull chat. They are the winners of the opening 3 rounds, really, and from testing really onwards, they've been the dominant team, and I expect that to continue. And then it's just a case of whether how long they can keep going. How long they develop this car, how long until they switch to the next season's car. So yeah, be interesting to see on that. But yeah, I'll move to the other obvious one, which is Fernando Alonso / Aston Martin as a winner. Alonso's the only driver apart from Verstappen to be on the podium for all 3 races. He's taken 3 third places. And what do you think the ceiling is for Aston Martin this season, and where do you expect them to finish up this year? Do you think they can, keep pace with or continue to be that second team behind Red Bull?
I've, ooh, Well, I wouldn't say they're definitely second team now. I think it's very close between themselves and Mercedes, and then Ferrari over one lap. I think are there as well. But I think they can. I think they can finish. In fact, I was going to say they will finish in second. But if I'm not will because the driver up. I don't know, but I think they can win races, and they can have the odd pole position there, here and there as well in the right circumstances. Because I do see Ferrari, Aston Martin, and Mercedes closing the gap to Red Bull in general over the season anyway. And I think if they can be on pure pace, match Red Bull at some point later in the season, that is a massive achievement from where they were last year when they were over 1 second behind Red Bull and the leading pace last year. So to bridge that gap is just an immense job from them. The technical team has done fantastic work over the winter. So yeah, I would be surprised now if they don't win a race or don't have a pole position, and it'll be a very tight fight for second place in the championship. It's just whether Lance Stroll, I don't want to say lets them down, but costs them too many points compared to Hamilton and Russell, which is a much stronger lineup than Alonso and Stroll. So yeah, I mean, it's just all so positive, isn't it? I mean, to bridge that gap, we haven't seen a team do this for quite a long time. And I mean, when was the last time someone kind of jumped from the midfield to the front like this? Probably talking. Let me think.
It
You got
depends
anything,
if you
Adam?
count Racing Point in 2020. I
Yeah,
wouldn't personally. I mean, I guess Ferrari,
yeah, Ferrari,
by
yes,
definition, Ferrari. But yeah, there's
21 to
not
2022. Yeah,
kind of been a team that's been stuck in the midfield for so long that has then jumped forward.
yeah.
I
I
mean,
mean,
probably since Red Bull, to be honest. Red Bull are the
yeah, I
last
was
team
going
who
to say
did it,
2009.
who did it consistently. Slash Brawn, I guess, also did it even more successfully. But in terms
Lotus
of,
as well. Renault
yeah, Lotus
Lotus
actually,
2011 to 2012. That's
yeah,
probably the last kind of one like that. Although 2012
mm,
was a crazy season in general because like Williams, had a decent car as well then. So yeah, we're probably talking that 2012 kind of year.
yeah. I mean, with Aston Martin, the one thing is in terms of like aero testing, then obviously they benefited from getting a lot more. I think they got 25% more than Mercedes
Yeah.
or Ferrari last. Yeah, so 25% more than the front runners from last year. But that will stop. That advantage will stop in June. So they have set like chunks for the wind tunnel testing where you've probably seen the graphs of like how many wind tunnel runs each team gets. So that's per 8 week blocks, but then at the end of June, then the kind of order of how much you get switches to the current constructors championship. So if it was right now, Aston Martin would get the second fewest. So that's the only thing that, like, will that hamper them? I mean, it'll probably be more their development for next season's car, but I think that is just kind of
Yeah,
something
that's what I
worth
was.
thinking about. But apart from that, yeah, I think it is quite tight. I would definitely have them ahead of Mercedes on race pace, and definitely ahead of Ferrari as well on race pace. I think Ferrari are struggling more in that department, but I just think they'll struggle to keep ahead of Mercedes over the course of the season. I think Mercedes will come back, and I mean, even even now, having had to reset their whole kind of design philosophy, then they've been able to challenge for podiums and had a pretty strong race or pretty strong weekend in Australia. So yeah, I think I predict third place for Aston Martin, but like you say, it's still a massive jump from where they were last season, where they have been since 2020, really.
And I think with the Aston Martin, it looks so good to drive. I mean, the handling of
Mm.
it. I think Alonso's been saying this is one of the best kind of handling cars he's ever driven in F1. It just looks so. It does what the driver wants to do, and that's so important in any form of motorsport. It's just a straight line speed, which could be an issue at some circuits. But that said, Australia, Melbourne, which we've had recently, uh, that is probably one of the most straight line speed, straight line dependent, circuits, and they still finish third there. But that is the one kind of big weakness for me is the straight line speed. They could be sitting ducks on some circuits. Like Baku will be quite interesting actually to see if how much time they lose in that final sector, because it's basically just flat out apart from that one corner. So yeah, that's the only weakness. But apart from that, in terms of handling the chassis, the suspension, you got the tires working as well. They seem to have great tyre wear, but they're also firing them up quite well. So they got everything in those kind of handling departments.
Yeah, definitely. And I think crucial to that as well is that's kept Fernando Alonso on board, and they all seem to be pulling really well there. And I imagine Red Bull will switch their focus to next season quite early on. So I think we might see what happened with Mercedes dominance, where particularly Red Bull will come back near the end of the season and be able to win a few races, and then it get to the start of the next season and Mercedes will be clear. But I think it will be on the table for some of those teams to fight for the win. Going negative, can you throw out a loser for us?
I forgot. Sorry. I was trying to unmute myself. It was 3 years we've been using this one. Loser. Stop shaking your head.
It's about 180 episodes.
It is about 100. Well, it's more than that, isn't it? It's about
185, I'd guess, for you.
185. Have we done 185 episodes? Yeah, I've
Well,
done
we've done 100. As a podcast, we've done 188. But how many of you missed? Like 4?
2 or 3, I think. Yeah. 2 or 3.
So,
yeah. Mad.
You still can't unmute yourself.
No, I mean, I had a streak of like 113 or something, which is crazy. But anyway,
where's that
the
streak
question,
now,
to answer
Nigel?
your question, yeah, it's down the bin.
Yep.
AlphaTauri, big loser for me, because they are probably the slowest car. And I think in general, the consensus was they were going to make a step forward into next year. Franz Toss has been quite critical of the technical team, saying that they weren't, let's say, fully honest with how good the car was. And yeah, it does appear to be. So we say this quite often, but someone has to be last. And at the moment, it appears to be AlphaTauri, although they're not like miles last. I mean, Tsunoda managed to get points in Australia, which was fantastic. And I actually think he's driven quite well this year. But I think the AlphaTauri did generally struggle to develop that like really well as well. So I think they're going to be at the back at most or the majority of races this year, which isn't ideal, obviously.
How do you think this kind of affects their two drivers? Because it felt like Tsunoda was definitely in the hot seat, needing a good year, but then I think it makes it difficult where they're only really battling one team. To then, how do you evaluate that? And also, how would you say De Vries has done over the start of his F1 career?
It makes it very difficult for the drivers, because if they were further forward and they produced the performances that they have in the first 3 races, I think Tsunoda will be getting a lot more credit. I mean, me personally, I think he's still done a very good job, and he's clearly improved from last year. And then from De Vries, he's just not. I don't think he's gelled with the car that well. I mean, we saw with his Williams debut at Monza last year how good he was to be better than Latifi on his first outing. But I think what it's shown is that changing team and changing car, it makes a massive impact on the driver. And you can say the best drivers will adapt to it and that kind of thing. But most drivers, it's so car and style specific to gel with the car that you can lose tenths, half a second in terms of lap time. I think that's where De Vries has just struggled with the AlphaTauri. He's just not quite gelled with it. So he's not been great for De Vries at all. He does need to begin to match Tsunoda if he wants to, stay in F1, because there's so many Red Bull juniors, including Liam Lawson, who's doing quite well in Super Formula this year. Who could take the
literally
seat
leading
next year.
F2. He's literally leading F2.
Wasser as well, yeah. And Lawson.
Nigel's pick for the Red Bull seat,
Lawson.
for the AlphaTauri seat next year, was Liam Lawson. So I think that's why he's pushing that agenda.
That is why. I'm not pushing an agenda. I'm just having an opinion.
You've been caught in, well, not 4K, because our webcams don't do that, but you've been caught in some 360p or something.
1080 maybe. What was I saying? Yes. I think I've answered your question actually. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it makes it really difficult to then evaluate like how good a job Sonoda's doing in the car, because if you got De Vries, who I just think hasn't, like you say, hasn't gelled with the car, hasn't you know he's just not really performed so far. But then it's you're then thinking, how bad is the car? Like, is it actually that? Like, is it as bad as De Vries makes it look, or is there just that gap between the drivers where Sonoda, and obviously he's been in the team for 2 years into his third year now, and was a Red Bull Junior for a decent while before that as well. Is it just that familiarity that's the difference, or like, yeah, where's the kind of gap between the drivers? So, yeah, I think it's kind of difficult. I'd imagine at the very early days, but I'd imagine based on what we've seen, then Sonoda will be feeling good about his chances for next season, but De Vries maybe less so unless those performances can improve.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you can only beat your teammate. And when we always talk about what happens if Verstappen and Hamilton was in the worst cars of the Alpha Tauri this year, where would the Alpha Tauri be then? That kind of thing. And it's just impossible to say. It could be like suddenly, I don't know, 7th or 6th quickest car or something, scoring points, consistently. Uh, so it's just really, really hard to say. But I think Sonoda's doing pretty much everything he can right now. He just needs a bit of fortune, I think, to have that outstanding result, and then more, let's say, more people will notice his performances. But I think Red Bull will notice that he's beaten De Vries, and they'll be quite happy with that.
Where would you rank McLaren, or how would you kind of evaluate their season? Because obviously, like they came into it and had an absolutely torrid like Bahrain Grand Prix. Like I don't remember seeing a worse Grand Prix from a team in a while. But they have Norris is 8th in the championship. Piastri's like settled in. He scored points in Australia, and they are actually looking not so bad. Like I feel like it's quite a difficult one to evaluate. But would you put them in either camp of winners and losers?
I think they would still be losers for me because I think they were. Well, they've not got closer to the front, have they? And I think, especially
Mm,
looking at Aston Martin, that would have been their goal. And if anything, they have slipped back a bit. But you are right. The first two races did make the performance look worse than it was, and I think we said that before Australia as well. But I think just in terms of because I think with winners and losers, we have to look at the the gap the team or the car has made from last year to this year. McLaren haven't made any progress, which is why they've changed technical team, and we discussed that before Australia. So I think they're still in the loser camp for me.
yeah, I think that's fair enough. I mean, Piastri seems to have settled in pretty well. Seems to be living up to his height. He looks better, significantly better, I'd say, over race pace than in qualifying, although he did make Q3 in Saudi Arabia. But yeah, I'd say definitely like he still seems to lack something to Norris in qualifying, which is no bad thing. Norris is one of the best qualifiers on the grid, but on race pace, then he does seem really competitive. And considering the size of the challenge coming in, I think he's bedded in really well. And I don't know if I would. I don't know if I'd put him as a winner because, like you say, if you're coming into a midfield team, you'd expect to be in a better situation with the car, but also, he could have done a lot worse from these first 3 races than he has. So I'd be tempted to put him as a winner.
Yeah, I can see that. You'd say McLaren's a loser, but then Piastri's a winner just because of how he's performed with the situation he's got and the kind of, I wouldn't say pressure because I don't think he had too much pressure, but there was certainly after the first race, there were people saying, wondering why was there so much hype about him, and that's just people judging things over one race, which is stupid. Uh, so yeah, I think he's certainly met our expectations, and this is what we kind of expected. But so yeah, in that kind of sense, he is a winner. Just
If you got another one to throw out for either camp.
I don't have any more winners. I don't think. I mean, I've got lose. I mean, there's arguably a lot of. Well, actually, Williams would they be a winner? Would you say? They're kind of like in that
Mm,
50-50 camp for me.
yeah, they're not by far the worst team anymore, which is good. But I mean, they're still like they're behind AlphaTauri in the championship, which is pretty like that surprised me. I didn't realize that
Yeah.
they were there. But Yeah, I think like you'd also expect them to. Like, there's the budget cap in place. They've got the most aero testing this season. Like, if they didn't, you have to take a step forward. It feels like it should be part of the course that they're taking that step forward. And the fact, they're still probably in that battle. I'd say there's a kind of a wider battle between the bottom 5 teams in the championship, and they're probably there. But yeah, I'm not sure. I'd say they're meeting expectations, I'd say.
Okay. Because I think if Albon did get that 7th or 8th, or even better because of all the chaos at the end in Australia, if it weren't for the spin that he had during the race, that would have changed a lot of people's perspective on it.
Mm,
I kind of feel like, because that would have been an amazing result, and I think Albon's done quite well as well this season. And I think Sargent hasn't looked as bad as some people think as well. I mean, he's made a couple of key errors, but in terms of raw pace, I think he's actually looked quite good, which is good to see. So yeah, I think overall they're kind of they're not quite in the winners' camp, but that would be the only other, in terms of like teams and drivers, the only other possible winner, I think, for me. I think.
Sargent's Saudi qualifying was a bit of a mess, but apart from that, he does. Before the season, I thought we'd need to see that actually this would be a bedding year, and next year we'd see the best of him. So the fact that he's exceeded that is pretty good, I'd say. So yeah, I'd say from a driver point of view, they're definitely doing well. But I guess like one of the losers would just be F1 because of the complete lack of, a fight at the front of the grid. I saw something that was is like comparing the speeds from the like all the teams on the grids compared to the top team, and it's like I forget who they said was the fastest. I think it was just based on qualifying. They said Ferrari was the fastest team, and they were like 0.4% behind Red Bull. Whereas last year and in 2021, then there was it was in like the hundredths of percent. So it's like a lot tighter. It's basically like over 4 times less competitive this year than it was last year. And I feel like it has just been especially before the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, it felt like there was just no hype at all for it. Whereas like Bahrain, there's always that opening season hype, but for Saudi Arabia, it really felt like just so flat. And I'm not sure there needs to be a good result over the next few races for any of the Aston Martin, Mercedes, or Ferrari to, I guess, put some hype back into the season. Would you say?
Yeah. In terms of the title race, I mean, absolutely. It's just it's just one of those things. It's like if you took out Mercedes from 2014 to 2016 and 2019, 2020 as well, the field will look super competitive, and that's what we're getting now with Red Bull. If we took them out, it'd be ridiculously tight. It's just they've done such a good job, and massive credits to them, that it doesn't look too great. And I think this is what I always meant by 2021, when ignoring the controversy and all the stuff that happened for a sec, but like that was as close as you can get between 2 top teams over the course of a whole season. And that's why, for me, it was the perfect season. And now, the last couple of years, and in general, this is a more average F1 season where, because of the rules and because of the regulations, you are going to have one team that builds the best or fastest or the most all-round car, and that's happened to be Red Bull this year. So, yeah, I think absolutely the next races for the title race need to be closer. And I think it just shows as well how important it is that even if you have 2 teams out in front and the miles in front of everyone else, you literally just need 2 teams out in front close together, because that's what makes sport, I guess, by having those close rivalries, which we had in 2021. So yeah, hopefully it does get closer, but at the moment it is hard to see how Red Bull don't win, the next 3, 4, 5 races, really.
I think the thing for me is like it doesn't have to be like 2019. There wasn't really a title race, but it was still a really great season because there was great races.
But
So
the first
that
8 or
doesn't.
9 races weren't that. It was only the second half where where
Yeah.
there's some amazing races. But the first eight, this year could be like that. The first 7, 8 races could be Red Bull dominate, just like Mercedes in 2019. Then suddenly there's a streak of good races, and that's how I kind of feel this season could happen.
Yeah, definitely. Like that's what I see. That's the kind of only reason for optimism really this season is that there could be, and again, like Mercedes then turned up the next season with an absolute rocket ship and won what 14 races, 12, 13 out of 16. So it kind of maybe some of that development did then kick into next year. But 2019 was a really good season and had a really good string of races in the middle where it was uber competitive and really entertaining. So that is possible, but it's just whether we'll see that over the course of the season or not, because Red Bull are just so far ahead right now. So yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, yeah, the other two obvious losers quickly, obviously Mercedes and Ferrari because they're not in the title fight. They're both expected to be in the title fight, and that just kind of links to what we're talking about now: is can they close the gap? And if anything, you'd say Aston Martin are the most likely ones to bridge the gap. Well, Aston Martin or Mercedes and Ferrari, probably not, because it looks like they have too many problems for me. Whereas Mercedes and Aston Martin, that probably have a bit more confidence in to at least reduce the gap to Red Bull.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, that's a kind of quick fire look at who's hot and who's not over the opening 3 rounds of the season. We'll be back next week with a Baku Grand Prix preview as we go into the next little leg of the season. But Nigel, have you got anything to add?
I just want to add quickly. I've just remembered there was some very sad motorsport news last week where WRC driver Craig Breen sadly passed away. And when I saw news, it was an absolute massive shock. I mean, he's only 33. He came second in the one outing he's done so far in Rally Sweden. And yeah, it was just a massive shock for any racing driver to sadly lose their life in this day and age. And yeah, I think WRC has not happened for quite some years now as well. I mean, it happened in testing. The Rally Croatia is this weekend coming up, but yeah, just a massive shock for that. And obviously, that his thoughts and prayers with his family and friends because yeah, It's not often I get surprised by news, but seeing something like that is still kind of gets me a bit, and it just shows how dangerous motorsport is. And I know there's been lots of tributes from the WRC kind of community and motorsport as a whole. So yeah, just a quick mention of that because yeah, we had Ken Block earlier this year in January, and then now this. So yeah, it's not been the best news for the off-road scene this year, but yeah, massive shame that news happened last week.
Yeah, you see it in all forms of motorsports. The crashes that people go through and then just walk away from, and it can kind of dull you to that, the danger that still exists for any form of motorsport. So yeah, completely echo everything that you've said on that. And yeah, with that, we will thank you very much for listening and say goodbye until next time.